This compact miter saw station packs a serious punch. With fold-up wings on both sides, a lockable saw stop extending to 1.97 m on the left and 1.22 m on the right, plus 12 drawers and a built-in dust collection. Let me show you how you can make your own. This is the miter saw station I first built when starting this workshop. And these shelves are filled to the brim with all my tools. Now that I'm upgrading my workshop, it's a good time to build a new miter saw station and to add some drawers to it. I'm first starting by ripping sheets to a smaller, more manageable size. I'm using my track saw for this, but a circular saw with a straight edge could do the job just the same. In fact, you could probably build most of this using just a circular saw and a drill. Before we get too far into this build, I want to show you how I plan out my cuts. I want to emphasize I'm not sponsored by this app, and I'm just using the free version. Anyways, the app is called Cutlist Optimizer, and it makes this really easy. Over here you type in all the measurements of your pieces and how many you need of each. You can set materials in case you're working with different thicknesses, and you can even set labels so you know what's what when cutting. Then, down here, you can put in the measurements of your stock. When you're done putting everything in, the app calculates the optimal way to cut your pieces. It even takes into consideration grain direction and saw blade thickness if you wanted to. I'm putting the PDF with the complete list in the description, in case you want to build this exact station. Now that the boards are easier to handle, I'm using the table saw to rip them to final width. And then I can use the miter saw to cut them to length. The sides are too wide for the cut capacity of my miter saw, so I'm using the table saw with a sled, which I clamped a square to so I could do repeat cuts. If you want to build this only using a circular saw and a drill, you can skip this step, as it's technically not necessary, but I'm routing a rabbet in the side to fit the bag into. But you could also just screw the bag on without the rabbet. This is shop furniture after all, so keep it simple. With everything cut to size, we can now assemble the cupboards. I see people using pocket holes all the time, but again, this is shop furniture, and there's no point in overcomplicating shop furniture, so I'm first clamping all the parts together and then screwing them together. While I assemble, let me explain why we pre-drill before adding screws. When you pre-drill, you only make a hole through the outer board, just big enough for the screw to slide through easily. This allows the screw to pass freely through the outer board, so when you drive it in, the threads only grip the inner board. If you don't pre-drill, the threads grip both boards, which prevents them from being pulled tightly together. Pre-drilling allows the screws to pull the boards snugly, giving you the strongest and cleanest joint. For the second cupboard, I have one long side and one short side. I mark the short side onto the long side, so I know where to attach the cross brace. Part of the cupboard is lower to allow the top of the miter saw to sit flush with the tops of the cupboards. They're only screwed together right now, so they are not very strong, but once we add the back, it's going to strengthen the whole thing. I first put a couple screws into one side to fix the back to it. Then I'm measuring across from corner to corner. Once both are the same length, it means the cupboard is square, and I can finish screwing the back on. Now it's rigid and square. If you want to build this miter saw station stationary, you can level them on the floor using spacers and then screwing them together. But since I'm still figuring out where everything is going to end up in the shop, I'm putting the station on casters. Let's go over how you can alter the station for your particular miter saw. First, you measure the height of your bed. In my case, that's 83 mm. Then, measure the width of your saw. In my case, that's 450 mm. Lastly, you measure any extra space that the miter saw takes up when you set an angle, for example. For mine, that is an extra 50 mm for the angle irrigation. I put the top on separately from the cupboards. This enables me to adjust the height of them later, so that the top of the miter saw is exactly flush with the side tables. Now with the saw fixed in place, I can adjust the side tables. I'm clamping a straight edge to the saw and then checking along the entire width what I need to adjust. In my case, the side tables are lower, so I can go and use plastic shims to shim them up and screw them on. Make sure to do this for both the front and back of the table. If your side tables are higher than the saw, you can simply raise the saw platform with a couple of shims. I must have made a little mistake during assembly, as the right side of the table was sitting a little too high. So instead of having to lift the saw and then readjust the left table, I got my power plane out. With the tops attached, I can now cut off some space for the mitre adjustment. You can simply take a ruler or some scrap and draw a straight line from the station and then cut it with a jigsaw. Or if you don't have a jigsaw, a circular saw would work too. Now it's time to make use of those extra 5 cm that we left on either side. A little trick: if you can't reach somewhere with your jigsaw, you can turn the blade around in the jigsaw and cut backwards. This doesn't have to be exact, just roughly mark out the location and cut until it fits. With the saw and tables fixed and leveled out, we can now get to the fence. I'm gluing 2 18mm plywood strips together to make a thicker fence. In hindsight, I should have used 3 to make space for the measuring tape, but I'll fix that problem later. I always like to save clamps by clamping the whole fence as one large package. While the glue dries, I'm going to add some wings to the sides of the table to extend the cut capacity. I'm using these folding shelf brackets that I can simply screw on. I was considering doing a clever mechanism with some hinges and a plywood triangle, but these really aren't that expensive and they work really hassle-free. If your wings don't line up with the table, you can use shims again to align it. I'm running the fence over the jointer to clean up the glue and to get a flat edge, and then ripping them to width with my table saw. Alternatively, if you want to keep this project simple, you could have screwed the fence together instead, and there would be no glue to clean up or boards to straighten. Earlier I used my router to put a rabbet into the sides, but you can also do this using your table saw. I need this rabbet to fit the T-track into. Alternatively, if you want, you could just screw the track straight on without the rabbet. The rabbet just makes it a little neater. To attach the fence, I'm clamping the straight edge back onto the saw. I cut my fence a little too low, so I'm adding a little spacer piece underneath. I'm setting the spacer back a couple of millimeters. This way, if there's a little bit of dust on the table, it shouldn't stop the workpiece from sitting flush against the fence. You could achieve the same result with a little rabbet at the bottom of the fence or a chamfer. Now I can attach the T-track to the top of the fence. Since the track is made of aluminum, you can simply cut it on the miter saw using an old blade. Just be sure to protect your eyes. Since I did not make the fence thick enough, I'm just screwing on a little piece of pine to the back of the fence to stick my measuring tape to. To attach the tape, I'm first measuring the distance from the saw blade to the fence. My stop is adjustable, so I don't have to be super precise with this. I measured 23 centimeters from the saw to the fence. But since my stop reads from the left side of the stop, I'm shortening my measurement by roughly the thickness of the stop, which is about a centimeter. Again, you don't have to be super accurate with this, as we can adjust the stop later. After doing a test cut and measuring our piece, we can set our stop to the correct position. After taping the whole length, I'm using a chisel to cut right where the two fences meet. I made the space under the saw big enough to accept my hoover and a 10-liter bucket, to which I added a little dust separator. There are tons of videos out there that go into more detail about them. In short, they improve the longevity of your hoover bags, and with that save you a ton of money, because those bags are pricey. Now I'm just running the wires through the back, and with that, the miter saw part of the miter saw station is finished and 100% usable. But I'm not just building a miter saw station, I also have a big storage problem to tackle. So that's why we're gonna build a bunch of drawers now. Drawer boxes are really easy to make. First, I cut a groove into the side of the drawers. Just wide enough to fit some 9mm plywood. The slot is cut at the same height as the front and back pieces. To assemble the boxes, I'm using glue and nails. There are many ways you could do this, but this is just shop furniture, so this is the quickest and easiest way. The nails are mostly just there to hold the pieces in place while the glue dries. You could also clamp or even screw them together. With all 4 pieces nailed together, I can now slot in the bottom. I made the slots a little too tight, so I had to get the hammer out to get it to fit. When nailing the bottoms on, make sure to check for square again, the same way we did earlier when assembling the cupboards. In terms of size of the drawers, I made the drawer boxes 2mm narrower than the inside of the cupboards, and 1mm shorter than the depth. Depending on the drawer slides you use, you'll have to use different measurements. But drawer slides are really expensive, so I'll show you how you can make your own for cheap and easy. I'm just using some construction grade pine to cut some squares. Optimally, you would use some smooth hardwood like maple, but this will do for me. To make them as smooth as possible, I'm running them through the thicknesser. If you don't have one, you could use a card scraper or a hand plane. Worst case, you could sand them smooth, but plain surfaces are the smoothest. I'm using a spacer piece that I cut 1mm wider than the drawer sides and then screwing the slides on. You need a runner on the top and bottom of each drawer. When I first install the drawer, it runs pretty rough. Let me show you how you can fix that. Since this is plywood, I'm first sanding them. If it was a hardwood, planing or scraping would be better. Then I'm using some WD-40 silicone spray. Alternatively, you could use candle wax. You can apply this to both the slides and the drawer. If you were to put finish on the drawers, you want to avoid any part that makes contact with the slides, as the 2 finished surfaces would stick together. Now we can use our spacer piece to screw the rest of the drawer slides in. The topmost drawers are a lot smaller. To save on internal space, I'm cutting a rabbet instead of a slot into the sides and using a thinner 4mm MDF board that I had left over from some old IKEA furniture as the bottom. You could use the same 9mm ply as for everything else. I just wanted to have a couple extra millimeters. Because the MDF is rather weak, I can't use a nail gun to hold it in place, so I'm using staples instead, but screws would also do the trick. Now let's make the drawer fronts and doors. I left myself a sheet roughly the same size as the entire unit. This way I can have continuous grain running across the whole face. First I measure the width and height of all the drawers, and cutting the sheet to size. Then I'm ripping the sheet into strips, the height of the drawer plus the slides. In my case that's 118mm for the sides and 18mm for the slides, so 136mm in total. Then I'm cutting the pieces right down the middle using my Mitre saw. Make sure to keep all the pieces in order, because it can make a really annoying puzzle if you don't. Sand all the edges of any surfaces you're regularly going to touch. I see people making their own handles out of wood all the time, but handles are really cheap, so I just bought some. They're really easy to mount. First, divide the front in half. Then lay the handle down and measure from each side to center it. Mark the hole locations and drill a 4mm hole. After that, you can use your first piece as a guide to drill all the others. There are many ways to attach drawer fronts, but this is my favorite way. I'm first raising the drawers using some spacers, and then offsetting the front by 18mm using a scrap piece as a spacer. Then I use the holes we just drilled to screw the front to the drawer. Using the first drawer and some spacers, I can now align all the other fronts. Then, with all the fronts fixed, I can take the drawers back out and screw the drawers to the front from the inside. Then I remove the screws, finish drilling the holes and attach the handles. Now just rinse and repeat until all the drawers have handles. For the doors, I re-measure from the bottom of the bottom drawer to the top of the second drawer from the top, and then I take the width. With those measurements, I cut a door to size, and then cut it down the middle to give me a 2mm gap. Hanging doors can be a bit frustrating if you don't know what you're doing, but it's fairly straightforward once you do. First, I hold the door right where I want it to hang. Then I draw 2 lines to mark the positions of my hinges. Next, I drill a 35mm wide and 13mm deep hole in the door, leaving a 3mm gap to the side of the door. There are plenty of jigs out there that make this process a breeze. And if you're really interested, I can make a more detailed video all about different hinges and how to hang doors. Now, on the cupboard, we draw a line exactly 37mm away from the edge and screwing the mounting plate to it. There's a little arrow on the plate, make sure it's facing the edge. Now we can just clip the door to the mounting plate. There are some adjustment screws which we can go over if you want me to make that video. Last step is just attaching the handles, and with that, the station is finished. I filled all the drawers right away, and it made such a difference to my shelves. A lot of the things I put in here I want to hang on the walls or have in different places in the future. But for now, having these drawers really helps me clean up my workshop. Before I show you how tidy my shelves are now, let me show you a little feature I added. Since we cut the start of the tape measure off, we can only lock the stop at around 30 cm. But I cut myself a piece to exactly 30 cm and added a second scale above the first one. Now, if you want to cut a piece to, let's say, 10 cm, I simply set up my stop using the top scale and my spacer block. And here we are. My shelves aren't as overloaded anymore. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you have any questions, comment them. I try to reply to everyone. And let me know if you want that video on doors and hinges. With that, thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video.